more than enough time, and if we don't, we'll come back to it later. So we actually spent a little time informally yesterday looking at the memo that we got from somebody with instructions and an attached chart showing reports that we should provide some feedback on. And we didn't actually look at the reports, but we've tried to familiarize ourselves with that list.
Okay.
And there were some questions about why those reports were on that list and others weren't. The dates were entirely making sense to me anyway. And I think others may have had different questions. So if you can help us understand that, and then you sent another chart yesterday.
Yep.
That has a longer list of reports that the committee is going to be getting this year sometime.
So this is Mike O'Grady with Legislative Council. Years ago, there was an employee at the administration, Otto Trouts, and he would track all the reports that the legislature required from the executive branch. And one year he showed up and there were thousands of reports. And many of them were not being fulfilled. And so the General Assembly enacted a provision in Title III that provides that any annual report shall be repealed after 5 years unless, when it is first enacted, the General Assembly says they don't want it to repeal, or the General Assembly says after 5 years they want the report to continue. So the memo that you got in the color-coded table, those are the reports that are slated to repeal this year, either because they're at the end of their first 5-year life or their second 5-year life. And so that's why you get the color-coded memo. And there is another document which shows you everything that's due to you, whether or not it's one of those reports subject to the 5-year repeal, whether a one-time report or whether it's one of those reports where you said when you enacted it that you didn't want the 5-year repeal to apply to it. And so it would continue, and you would never see it on the color-coded memo because you said at the very beginning, notwithstanding 3 VSA Section 20D, you're going to have this report.
Yeah, okay. So if we enacted a new report last year, and I'm not thinking off the top of my head that we did, but if any legislation that we passed said, new report, it either said it's indefinite.
Right, usually it says annually.
Yeah. And if it said annually, then would it be subject to the 5-year review?
It would be unless prior to that you said notwithstanding 3 VSA Section 20D. Right.
Okay, good.
So I'm pretty familiar with the reports on both tables. I can walk you through those tables if you would like.
You want to start with that would be helpful. Yeah. Do you want to start with the shorter one? What the colored one?
Sure. Just hopefully I can get it up on the screen. All right, great. But first, 6 VSA 4825, that is one of the ag water quality financial grant programs. It's set up to provide financial assistance to farmers that need help meeting the RAPs or their medium farm permit or their large farm permit. It's often cost shared with federal dollars, federal BMP dollars from USDA and NRCS. And the report is about what they have awarded and to an extent the success of those awards.
And the chart shows it as expiring in 2018. So at that time, was it renewed for 5 years?
Right, that was, yes, it was pushed the first 5 years, and then the second 5 years is this coming up.
It's red.
Yeah, so it's supposed to expire,
Okay, so that's what the red means.
right?
Okay. And it says when due, there's a column that says when due at the top, and then it's due in 2021. Not sure whether that's meaningful.
Oh, I'm sorry. The first one is the Dairy Promotion Council.
Yeah.
And that's technically done.
Okay, so, sorry, this is so
Right.
small on my screen here, but carefully.
So that report, there is a provision that extended it 5 years, but I think it's technically expired. And you could say the same about 4825, but 4825, it also is issued with another report on ag water quality. So they just have been issuing them together. You're going to get 4825 in some form because they will continue to report on ag water quality. Because there is a report in under 4810 about them meeting their non-point source pollution goals, and they report on financing under that report as well.
Why is it red then?
Technically, it's expired, but you're going to continue to get that information
Okay,
in the reports, in several different reports, frankly.
okay.
Okay.
But if you want that report to live on, you can make it live on. And then the next one, 1386. This is the report on the Lake Champlain TMDL. There are several reports on the Lake Champlain TMDL. If you let this expire, you're still going to get the information either underneath the Clean Water Fund Board's report or the Clean Water Investment report from the Secretary of Administration. So you could probably let that expire.
All of the reports that for everything, every time you say this information is in another report, the reports all definitely come to this committee.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that when we look at
Yeah.
this one. The next report is DHCB's annual report. They report on conservation of ag land, and they also do ag water quality, and they also do farmer assistance, and they also do the rural economic development initiative program. So you probably want to keep that report.
So that's,
Does that extend or retain?
That is slated to expire.
so I mean, that seems like one we would want to retain. So it's, for some reason, when that was first enacted in 2017, and the right row here, yeah. In 2017, it was decided that 5 years would be enough for that report.
Whoever drafted it probably didn't pose the question to the committee about whether or not they wanted it to expire after 5 years or not.
Representative Templin.
So I'm just still a little bit confused about the 5-year window and these expiration dates. So do we just add 5 to the number and that's highlighted and that's when the report runs out?
So what they're asking you right now is there will be a bill and it will amend statute and it will strike the requirement for a report in statute. And do you want that to happen Or do you want that report to stay in statute and then be subject to another 5 years?
Right.
Or do you want it to stay in statute and you're going to add the notwithstanding?
So if we want that report to continue to come to us, then we would add the 5 years to the number highlighted.
Well, that's what the committee, the GovOps committee is going to do. They're going to ensure that anything that you want to retain is retained for however long you want, either for another 5 years or annually.
It's the math I'm having a hard time understanding here. So for example, in the highlighted region, we see past 2 years.
Right.
So what,
It just hasn't been removed from statute yet. It technically was expired, but it hasn't been removed from statute yet. And so it's,
out of neglect?
well, the committee does this every year and they basically select the reports that they are going to offer to you that are going to repeal. But this is their process. It's not, this is how they do it. They identify the reports that they're going to amend / repeal. And then they offer the committees the opportunity to provide input on whether or not to repeal them. And then you provide your input and they usually do what you recommend.
So, but I'm still lost on the math here. So these are,
I'm going to just say that I'm a little bit lost too.
Yeah.
And I think I'm feeling for myself, maybe getting too hung up on that. And
okay, fair enough.
yeah,
So let's just say that they repeal after 5 years, but they don't automatically
stop.
disappear from the statutes.
Yeah, okay.
In order for them to disappear from the statutes, you have to go through and enact a bill that makes them disappear from the statute. And that's what this whole process is about, whether or not you want that bill to include these reports. And if you don't, then there will be provisions that are added to extend them either another 5 years or to put in that notwithstanding previous H-20D.
Yeah, I mean, wrapping your head around the logic there is something we can spend time on, but maybe better spend our time on, do we want to keep getting this report?
Yes. Got
And then
it.
we can figure out later if there's.
Sorry for the distraction.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
I was feeling the same way, like, I don't understand this, but maybe I don't need to understand.
Yeah, fair enough.
Representative Rice.
Yeah, my question was just a clarifying question, which I think you just cleared up, which is that even if we don't notwithstand the 5-year repeal, it doesn't actually immediately leave statute unless we take.
Unless you take an affirmative action to get it off the
Do
books.
they, after those 5 years, do they continue to do the reports even though?
No, that's the thing. That's the thing. Then the agency will say, oh, it's been 5 years. We don't have to do the report anymore.
So really, I think as we're going through this, we should be asking ourselves, is this a report that we want to continue getting? And it may not be self-evident, we may need to dig in a little bit more, but I think that's ultimately where we should focus yes or no on these reports. Each of them.
Okay, so the next one is the recommendations from the Clean Water Fund. So the way that the Clean Water Board works, they don't actually make appropriations. They don't issue grants or approve loans. They recommend to the governor how much money should be in the budget for clean water funding, and then the General Assembly enacts that. So it's an important part of clean water funding to have the board issue their recommendations.
So we should retain that.
You're going to get it anyway, regardless of if you take it away. The Clean Water Board's charged with recommending money for the budget. So if the report goes away, they still have that duty. But I think you'd want to officially recognize that they're reporting to you instead of just reporting to the governor.
We actually had a conversation yesterday about the fact that some of these reports will be, prepared anyway for some audience. And if in a sense that, possibly there's work and effort being expended to produce a report that nobody looks at, ever, us and nobody, that might be a report that we give, some particular thought to, saying, no, we don't need this anymore. But if it's already happening anyway, and it's just a question of maybe reformatting it, putting a new title page on, there's not a lot of resources being devoted to that step. And
So you will see when we go through this that there's also what's called the Clean Water Investment Report, which it sets forth how much has been appropriated in the budget, how much is being used, how much federal funds are being brought down, how many grants are going out for ag, how many grants are going out for municipal, how many grants are going out for forestry, et cetera. So this information is kind of duplicated in a couple of different reports. The next one is 2017 Act 77. This was the act that established the Rural Economic Development Initiative. You will see right here in 10 VSA 325M that report was basically superseded. So the session law report from 2017 was superseded by an amendment in 2018, which added the report to statute. You don't need that 2017 session law report anymore. It's really superfluous.
Repeal that, or that's it?
They'll just strike it. In the committee, in the Ops committee. So the next one down is the Farm Viability Enhancement Program. So this is the farm viability. You're going to see later there's a forest viability program. This is farm viability. It's from the Agency of Ag. They have a program where they provide services to farmers and some grants. And the question is whether or not you want to continue to receive that report.
And that was established in 2017.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can give you more information about that report if you would like. So they basically just give you a report on their activities and performance of the program. At a minimum, they shall include an evaluation of the program utilizing the performance goals and performance measures established by their advisory board. And we already talked about READY. Everyone know what READY is?
Oh,
Okay, it's a few years back, there were a lot of federal funds that were available to small municipalities, but the small municipalities didn't have the resources or the staff to do the grant applications or to navigate all that was required in the grant applications. So it was really Senator Polina basically tried to figure out a way to get resources to those small towns so that they could access those grants and other financing available to them. And so he set up, it's called the Rural Economic Development Initiative. Effectively what it is money that's appropriated to VHCB to hire grant writers that are available to small towns to access these funds. It's only available to rural communities, but they use the census characterization for what is rural in Vermont. And so it's available in every county but Chittenden County. Because every county in the state is designated rural under the census, except Chittenden. So it's been performing pretty well. I think the last time I saw a performance metric on it, they had appropriated $200,000 and it had brought down like 2.5 million for small towns.
Who in this case, who is producing the report?
Oh, VHCB produces the report.
VHCD.
Yeah.
Why in some instances is VHCV listed as the producer and in some instances others?
I don't know. I did not produce this table. But I mean, it's in 10 VSA 325M is within VHCB's statutory authority. Oh, it's because the language says the Rural Economic Development Initiative shall submit the report. But it's issued as part of the Vermont Farm and Forest Viability Program. It's the HCB issuing the report. And I don't know who their legislative person is these days since Jen, they retired, but Ray Martin would be a contact if you want to talk to them. And the last one is, again, a non-point source pollution report. I think you've heard testimony about how the Agency of Ag and the Agency of Natural Resources don't necessarily see eye to eye on water quality enforcement. And to formalize how they would interact with each other on ag water quality, the General Assembly directed them to enter into an MOU with each other on how they would handle complaints on ag water quality. And so you get a report every year on how the MOU was implemented, including how many complaints were issued, how many the Agency of Ag responded to, how many were then referred to A&R and the disposition of those complaints. It's really an accountability provision for those two agencies to ensure that they are continuing to enforce that MOU and at least superficially getting along.
And they co-authored the report then?
They do.
Okay. Representative Lipsky?
Yeah, I recommend that we continue these non-point source pollution's a big issue in the forestry sector. It's generally the only point of pollutants. So
Well, this is strictly for ag. This is strictly for implementing ag water quality enforcement. This report under 4810.
not Agency of Natural Resources.
It's not, it's DEC, which is the entity that's been delegated water quality enforcement by EPA, and the Agency of Ag. They're, I don't recall if there's a report on forestry. I will have to look into that.
Well, if you have a discharge off an active logging operation, I believe the DEC gets involved, so.
Right, if you're not implementing the AMP properly, you can be subject to water quality enforcement for any discharge, right?
There's a report for that.
And we may see that on the other list, but that's not what this report is anyway.
Okay.
So, yeah, okay.
Can I just ask for a quick return to the top down, just on the ones that are clearly like redundant and we don't need to
Well, I only think that there's one that's clearly redundant.
Okay.
And that's the Action Law Report 2017 Act 77, Section 1C. I think that that was effectively superseded by the report on the second page, 10 DSA 325. I mean, that's the only, clearly, they basically require the same information to be reported. The others all have some nuance in them that distinguishes them somewhat from other reports. But effectively, you get this information, like, for example, the information on awards, ag water quality awards. You get that information in the Clean Water Investment Report that I'll talk to you about in a minute. Execution of the implementation plan for Lake Champlain TMDL. You get that in the Clean Water Investment Report as well. But this is a little bit more specific about all the different things in the implementation plan. Frankly, if this report is repealed and taken out of the books, I think Secretary Moore will still provide you the information that's in that report in the Clean Water Investment Report. You know, the VHCB annual report, I don't really think there is redundancy anywhere with that. I think you want to hear from them about how they've assisted agriculture and conserved land. Clean Water Board recommendations on appropriations. It's going to be done because they have the duty to make a recommendation on how much money is in the budget. But whether or not you get that report is really about keeping this. Freddie, we already talked about Farm Viability Enhancement Program. You know, I think the agency wants to continue to talk to you about that. And then the MOU. If you want to go back to the days when they were not getting along and you didn't have any oversight over that, or at least you weren't getting an annual report on that, then.
Continue onward and upward. So, I think that other than that one involving Act 77, there's no obvious reason to say to any of them. And it might help if this is helpful, very helpful. We're not going to make this hard and fast decisions now. We don't have to. We've got another week before we have to respond. Procedurally, all of these reports have more than one recipient. So if we hypothetically said we don't need that anymore, but another committee said keep doing it, it's going to happen anyway.
It's going to happen anyway.
Yeah. Just I want to say to the public, we're running a little bit behind this morning, so we're still on our first agenda item, and we'll be doing that for another few minutes. But Representative Key.
Should want an acronym called EMDL.
Total maximum daily load.
Total maximum daily load.
So when in a water, so US EPA requires all states to have water quality standards, and they require the state to go out and assess every water in the state every 3 years. And if the water is not meeting that water quality standard or any water quality standard, then it's designated as impaired. When a water is impaired, the state has a duty to clean that water up. And the major tool for cleaning up the water is a total maximum daily load plan.
So not to belabor that point, when the flood event, let's say in July of 2023 occurred and massive tonnage of sediment and erosion from all the major watersheds feeding into the lake, how did they calculate that maximum load?
There's supposed to be what's called a margin of safety built into any TMDL to account for variability in rainfall and precipitation events.
So unless there's other questions about, right now for Mike about the reports on this list, maybe you just want to switch to the other list.
Sure.
For the longer list of reports that we're scheduled to get that include everything we just looked at and has all slated for repeal anyway.
So the first one is one you already looked at, the water quality ecosystem restoration. Actually, no, this is a different one. This is a program that A&R runs. They provide grants for really any water quality program. The Agency of Agriculture doesn't like when they give grants to ag programs because it kind of overlaps with their ag assistance. But A&R has grants to ag activities, and you get a report on that annually. The next three reports are related to the Petroleum Cleanup Fund. The fund is, the revenue in the fund is from a fee, a 1 cent fee on motor fuel, and then another 1 cent fee on heating fuel. You get a report on each of those accounts, and then you get a report from the Petroleum Cleanup Fund Advisory Board. Effectively, they're all combined together. The PCF Advisory Board usually doesn't meet its statutory deadline, which is January 15th. They usually get you their report around the end of February, and it includes all of that information in it. It's related to farming because the PCF provides grants to farmers to replace both underground and above ground storage tanks used on farms. The next one, skipping down to 10 VSA 1961. This is, hold on a second. This is the Vermont Citizens Advisory Committee for Lake Champlain. This is actually federally required that you have this advisory committee. And it's part of a multi-state effort for the management of the lake. And they report to you on their recommendations for the management of the lake every year. Sometimes the reports are helpful. There's usually a day when they all come in and provide you, all the members of the committee come in and provide you their recommendations. And so that's really what it is. The next 10 VSA 2721, this is a report from the Department of Forest, Parks and Recreation on the activities and performance of forestry and forest products viability program run by the department to support forest products industry in the state, value-added forest products. You get that report annually. You already looked at 10 VSA section 323, that's VHCV's annual report about all their activities and the grants awarded underneath them. 10 VSA 580B, I've always found this really curious. This is a report from the Agency of Agriculture about how the 25 by 25 renewable energy goals are being met by agriculture. I have never seen this report, but I just find it kind of curious that it even exists, frankly. I think you would want this in a larger report, but that's what the statute says.
Representative Supernath?
Who orders the reports?
It was in the 25 by 25 Act. So
What year was that?
look through my,
That's okay. It's, yeah, a while ago.
yeah. The next report has actually been repealed, the Government Accountability Report. That was repealed last year, I believe. And then the report on Ag and Forest Products Development Board Goals and Outcomes, that's also been repealed.
Are they on the list just for us to know that they used to be there?
I think they were both repealed recently, and I expect that no one informed the person that puts together this report that they were repealed.
Okay.
You already talked about the report of the Dairy Promotion Council. Even if you wanted that to go away, I would expect the Senate Ag Committee would probably want to retain it. The next is the Farm Viability Enhancement Program. You already talked about that. It's on the repeal list. 4825, the State Financial Assistance Award for Non-Point Source Pollution Program. That's also on the repeal list. The next is the Livestock Care Standards Advisory Council. This is a council that was set up to provide recommendations to you and to the agency on the standards for livestock care. A few years ago, the agency was getting multiple reports or multiple complaints that animals weren't being sheltered properly. And you, the General Assembly, did two things. You set up this Livestock Care Advisory Council, and then there was an effort to define what constitutes adequate shelter. And adequate shelter can actually mean just basically natural tree stands, et cetera, depending on the animal. The example that's given is that Scottish cattle, you can't get Scottish cattle to go in a barn. They don't want to go in a barn. And so they just need to have a stand of trees or somewhere else where they can congregate. So that's Livestock Care Advisory Council. You might be hearing a little bit about them. There's an animal welfare bill that's going to be maybe taken up, I don't know, but it's definitely been introduced. 6 VSA 981 is the Pest Control Compact. So that's an interstate compact where states agreed to provide assistance or services to other states when there's a pest infestation in that state. And you're supposed to get a report from the managing body of that control compact. I doubt you've received that report in a while, but you're supposed to receive it. The next is A&R, the basin plans. So the Federal Clean Water Act requires states to engage in what's called a continuing planning process for the use of their waters. Vermont complies with that by requiring A&R to do a plan for each of the 15 major watersheds. Those plans can be incorporated into regional plans or municipal plans and can affect how land in proximity to waters is used. So it can affect how agriculture could operate in proximity to one of these watersheds. So that is why you receive it. The Agency of Natural Resources used to be not very good at doing these plans or reporting about them, but over the past 10 years, they've gotten really good about it. It's honestly a success story at the agency for how they turned that program around. 4810 is the MOU between the Agency of Ag and A&R. We already talked about that. 10 VSA 1389A is the Clean Water Investment Report. That's the report that used to be fairly lengthy, but then the agency of the administration has abbreviated it but has provided links in it to other resources. This is how you find out how all the money you have appropriated for clean water is funded in each particular year, and it also has totals and achievements. 2017 77, that's that session law ready report that you don't need anymore. 2018 S260 section 1D, that's the Clean Water Board recommendation on what goes in the budget. 10 VSA 325M, that's the READY program, the report that's in statute. The next one, I don't really know why you get it. There was a requirement for A&R to recommend whether or not wetland scientists should be professionally certified by OPR. And you got it, but it was one time, but I don't know why it's on this list.
Not a recurring ask.
It's not recurring. I don't really know why it's on the list. The next is also, it was a one-time report from DFR to assess milk pricing in Vermont and recommend to the task force on revitalizing the dairy industry how to revise pricing. They complied with that requirement. They issued the report. And it wasn't an annual report, it was a one-time report. The next is something I don't know if you've received it yet, is a report from the Agency of Ag on their rulemaking on food residuals for composting. This was a big issue a few years ago, and you gave them authority over food residuals for composting and told them to adopt a rule and report to you on it. I don't know if you've received that yet.
Received it yet this year?
I don't know if you've received it at all. The next is the policy recommendations of the Agricultural Innovation Board regarding BMPs for the use of neonicotinoid treated seeds. I think you received that report.
Yeah.
Not yet?
It's due the 15th.
Well, not this year yet, but I think they
Oh, yeah.
they put it in last year. But they hadn't really formed yet last year, so they didn't have much to report on. And the next is the Agency of Education report on locally produced food from H106 from 2021. That comes in January 31st. I have never seen that report, but that's probably because I didn't draft it and wasn't connected to it. Then you have the surface water withdrawal report. There's an annual report to you about that. Remember, you kind of divided agriculture into its own regulatory scheme underneath the Agency of Agriculture. Farmers report to the Agency of Agriculture. The Agency of Agriculture then reports to the Agency of Natural Resources, and A&R then reports to you on all surface water withdrawal in the state. That is due February 15th. And then there's a report from the Department of Taxes on strategies and rates for use value. That's the annual report from PVR. That was due December 31st. I did not see that on the website though. And then 2023 There's supposed to be 10 VSA 2803, a inventory of Vermont's conserved land and conservation policies to serve as the basis for meeting the conservation goals of Act 59, which was enacted last year. That's due July 1, 2024.
That's it.
So I will let Katie McLean, who puts together these reports, documents, know of the ones that have already been repealed or were one time and were satisfied.
Okay. I think maybe, well, let's see if we have any questions for Mike about the list, and then we'll have some committee discussion. We have some time this afternoon, after lunch, where we can sort of share ideas on if there are any thoughts or questions and what we might want to do, knowing what we now know that we didn't know 45 minutes ago, if anything.
So should I start to move on to H614?
Let me just ask the committee, do you need a minute to stand up and stretch your?
Can I open a window or something? It's really hot in here.
Or
I also turn the heat down.
turn the heat off.
They've just put it in the middle, yeah.
Oh, someone.
I should make a.
That's why it's so hot.
It's still gonna be popular at that level.